Mr. Alfredo, you're invited to make the first presentation. Why adaptation is important. Can you tell us?
Okay, well, hello again, everyone. I'll try to be super brief. More than why adaptation is important, what I also want to address, and also very related to the topic of this panel, is risk assessment, interdependencies, infrastructure interdependencies, and cascading failures. It starts with why adaptation is important, but I think I will be preaching the choir here, so I don't want to spend a lot of time in that. Mainly from C40 perspectives, for those who don't know, C40 is an international organization formed by cities. Mayors are what make this organization happen, and they get involved with C40 because they want to implement climate change policies, address climate change through their policies, and make it in a faster, more efficient way, which is through collaboration and communication and exchange of best practices with other cities around the world. Out of the research that we have been doing at C40, we can say that 98% of the cities, and this is the cities themselves reporting on this, they have reported 98% of them that climate change presents significant risks for the cities. That's no news, but they are saying it, so it's official. The key hazards that the cities are concerned about is coastal and inland storm flooding, heat, as well as drought. Cutting off a little bit, constant goes. And also 61% of our cities also facing the risks of heat waves, including cities in Northern Europe where you wouldn't think that it's that hot anyway. But yes, it is. And what's happening is that like, the economic losses can climb up to $2.5 trillion by 2030 only on heat stresses for all these cities. And I'm always talking about the 91 cities that are part of C40. So with around 650 million people living in all C40 cities, we need to make sure that we get adaptation right. And there's no one way of doing adaptation. We have been discussing several ways, several mechanisms for financing it. But one of the things that concerns us the most, and one of the things that we have been working very strongly lately in the risk assessment network at C40, is that the concept of interdependencies of systems and cascading failures as a new approach. It's not really a new approach, but it's a kind of a new approach because cities were not really considering that before. And this approach allows us to have a much better understanding of what's going on in our cities, and also getting all the data from those sectors that the cities are not controlling. Sectors like energy, could be transport, could be telecoms, that in some of the cities, they own those systems. Most of the cities don't. So this can be private sector utility providers, could be nationally owned, could be regionally owned, but not city owned. And that means that cities not necessarily have the risk data from those sectors. So why it's so important to address interdependencies and cascading failures, what does it mean? The name by itself kind of explains. But interdependencies is systems. We think of cities as a living organism. And as such, transport, food, waste, water, energy are the different organs in this organism that keep the city alive. And the city cannot really survive without one or the other. And each of them are also connected. So it is our goal to understand more of this and understand how they are interconnected, where we have these intersections. So cities, once they have all the risk data they need, can go and work on those intersections. But let me explain a little bit about interdependencies and cascading failures. By definition, we can categorize interdependencies in physical interdependencies, which is commodities or services that are mutually dependent on each other. That can be an example of a power plant that needs fuel to be operative. And we can have a train line that not necessarily will be connected to this, but if this train is bringing the fuel to the power station, or the people that needs to operate the power station and the train is not working, then the power station won't be working, and vice versa, because the train will need the power to also work to get there. This is what we call physical interdependencies. Cyber interdependencies, that's something rather new, but most of our cities now are automatized, all information technology systems, and we know that if that gets compromised, many other things get compromised, even train or other systems are depending on IT to function. Geographic interdependencies is when an impact, let's say a climate impact, affects an area and other proximities around it. Usually this means when an area floods, you're not only losing this power station that was located in the flood-prone area, but also maybe you have a hospital, maybe you have a mosque or church, school, and these are also interdependent. And the best example is the usual. If you remember yesterday, there was a presentation. There was a picture of a road that was completely destroyed in the middle. Actually, one of the city officials that from Toronto that works with me in this has a really good picture from Toronto. It happened pretty much the same, only that under that road, you could see all the different pipes going there. And that's what happens everywhere. We try to put the pipes under the roads because it's easier. But if that road collapses, then you have gas, electricity, and water, all of them affected by one single impact. So this is geographic interdependencies. And then the logical interdependencies is the disruptions to a system and then causes other disruptions. So like a second wave, what we call a cascading failure. So in this case, the usual thing is, energy power station is affected, then hospitals don't have energy, then transport systems also get affected, then if transport systems get affected, food might not get to the city, medicine might not get to the city, and then telecoms also might start failing. And this is a very clear example of what happened in New York a year ago, or so, more. When the first impact in Manhattan was power stations, and then it went through like a massive domino effect through all of the other systems. Suddenly the city had nothing, had no power, had no health. People couldn't get out of their tall buildings because elevators were not working, and so on and so on. So we want to tackle this, and we want to make sure that our cities are much more protected than we think of. And in the previous session, I think Michael was saying that we can't really think that we have this problem sorted because we have this emergency plan or because we assume to know everything that's going on in the cities. So we started working with a group of cities at C40 that are leading in this topic of interdependencies, and we created, we did a research and a small report on interdependencies and cascading failures, but mainly focusing on 5 case studies: Toronto, Amsterdam, Melbourne, Johannesburg, and Bogota, to learn from those cities how they managed to bridge the gap of data and information and find these private or nationally owned utility providers and get them to collaborate with the city. This is not really happening unless the city approaches them. In some cases, there needs to be a lot of negotiations. There needs to be a whole workshop created there. Some other cases, it's just more simple. They just collaborate whenever you knock on the door. But something needs to happen. By creating these infographics, which unfortunately I don't think is very clear there, but this kind of infographics, what tell us is how different climate impacts, climate hazards, as you can see on the left. You can see extreme precipitation, extreme heat, sea level rise. This is a specific case for Toronto, and how that can affect, in this case, just transport systems. Just all of these 3 hazards, either one or the 3 together, can affect transportation. And in turn, transportation being affected will affect food supply, water supply, energy, telecommunications, wastewater, and solid waste. All of this, of course, will also become huge economic consequences on public health consequences, environmental consequences. and also freight and other services that need to provide the city. With this kind of graphics and infographics, these cities were able to make the case to their own bosses, to their own mayors, to bring together a working group or task force to go and approach all the utility providers, bring them, sit them down at the same table, discuss with them, and make sure that they could share all this data. Because of this small research we did, these 5 cities have included in their updated adaptation strategies the approach of interdependencies and have created different task forces to start working with the private sector or the nationally owned utility providers and kind of complete the risk map in their cities. This is just a show of how different climate hazards, you can see in colors at the left, can affect all the different other systems. So if you follow the arrows, you can, wildfires, for example, there has been a lot of those in Europe lately, and you can see how that can affect food, energy, water, transportation, and telecoms, and so on and so on. This is called the circular interdependencies graphic. But the idea here is that cities need to approach these sectors, and in general, as I said, it's not really easy, but we are counting on this. Many of our mayors are now trying to lead in an advocacy sort of attempt to lead the way and to approach these other companies, to bring more mayors in, and just to make sure that we can really tackle these problems before they happen, and that cities are fully protected, and not just regularly knowing what the risks are, but also knowing where the risks are and who is in charge of those. So if the energy provider is private, then they need to know, they need to have their own risk assessment done, and they need to know what to do and how they need to collaborate with the other system or utility providers that are interconnected and interdependent to their own. And I'm going to finish there, and I'm happy to answer any questions later. Thank you.